Hello everyone, today is the 600th anniversary of the Battle of Agincourt. Seeing how it is one of the greatest battles in human history, I think it absolutely deserves to be remembered, so that's why I made this episode today. Now, seeing how today is October the 25th, I had actually meant to have an entire series on the 100 Years' War done by now, but I'm running late on a Trojan War series I'm also trying to do. Yeah, I'm about a month late on that, but hopefully I can get that done and posted the first week of November, and then hopefully I can have a 100 Years War series done by the end of November. So if you like this episode, definitely check out my Trojan War series. Hopefully I'll have that done soon. And then after that, I should have the 100 Years War series done too, which this episode will definitely be an important part of. Now, I guess it's a fair question to ask as to why the Battle of Agincourt is so important and so famous. Well, basically you have an army, the British Army, and I'm calling them the British because it wasn't just Englishmen in the army. I mean, you would have had Welshmen, probably would have had some Irishmen. I doubt there were any Scots in Henry V's army. If there were any Scots at the Battle of Agincourt, they probably would have been in the French army. But yeah, I'm going to call Henry V's army British. Sorry if that offends anyone. But basically you have the British army, which is in terrible shape. I mean, they've been suffering from dysentery and just having to march hundreds of miles the last couple of weeks since taking the port city of Harfleur. And I guess when I do the 100 Years War series, I'll cover that whole part of it. But so they've been marching through northern France for a couple of weeks now, and they are just in shitty shape. And you have them going up against really a terrific French army. I mean, these guys are some of the best soldiers in all of Europe, maybe the world. These guys are well equipped, very well trained. I mean, these aren't peasants. These are paid professional soldiers who know how to fight and kill. And the French knights are par none. I mean, these guys have been trained how to fight, how to kill, and how to win since they were children. So, yeah, definitely a tough French army. You have the underdogs, being the British, going up against the seemingly overwhelming French army and defeating it. So that's always a pretty big crowd pleaser, underdog stories throughout history. And, of course, you gotta acknowledge William Shakespeare's Henry V. It kind of reminds me of when Alexander the Great visited the ruins of Troy and came upon supposedly a temple that held the remains and weapons and armor of Achilles. And Alexander the Great was a huge admirer of Achilles, and he was supposedly said to Achilles' belongings that, "Oh, fortunate youth, to have Homer as the teller of your story." And I kind of feel like the British soldiers would have felt just fine having William Shakespeare be the teller of their story, so yeah, that definitely helps with the legacy. I mean, people will always be reading Homer, and people will always be reading William Shakespeare. But I also think it's more than just that. I mean, the battle was a great victory. I mean, the use of topography, the tactics the British deployed, and there is a little something to be said about the classism, too. I mean, you have dirt poor British longbowmen going up against top-of-the-line French knights. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting. And you also have those longbowmen killing those French knights, so that's definitely an eye-opener. And I've seen a couple of people say in documentaries and stuff I've watched that this battle was the death of chivalry, which of course it wasn't. I mean, chivalry would go on for a long, long time after this battle. And the whole thing about the lowly archer bringing down his social better knight, I mean, that's nothing new. English and Welsh longbowmen have been bringing down their social betters for a good while now. It's just a great battle. I mean, you got the French versus the English. That's always big shit. You got King Henry V fighting amongst the enemy. I mean, he's definitely a tough dude. I mean, it's just a great battle. I mean, it is a one-sided affair, but given the conditions and the situation, you gotta tip your hat to the French. I mean, they were definitely tough, but it was just a perfect storm of screw jobs for the French that led to their bitter defeat. So let's get going here. On the morning of October 25th, the situation for the British was pretty dire. They had been blocked by the French army from getting to their friendly port of Calais. Basically, that's their ticket home. So now they're stuck in France and facing a very formidable army. It had been raining the last couple of days, so the British would have been cold, wet, tired, starving. And a decent part of the army had the bloody flux, as they called it, which is what we call nowadays dysentery. Dysentery is pretty brutal. It's basically an inflammation of the intestines and the colon, which causes bloody diarrhea. Yeah, which is why they call it the bloody flux. So basically when you have dysentery, you're just uncontrollably vomiting and shitting yourself. So it's just very brutal. And in fact, usually the way it kills you is you vomit and you have diarrhea until you die of dehydration. So fun. I mean, nowadays they would just, put you in the hospital, hook you up with a IV, and give you antibiotics. But back then, walk it off, pal. Just slap you on the back and wish you luck, basically. So yeah, those poor bastards having to walk all that way in the rain and stuff and just shitting everywhere. And in fact, most of the soldiers who had the bloody flux would have cut open their pants or let their pants out, so that basically looked like they were wearing a skirt or a kilt. And that's basically because when you have dysentery, you virtually have no control over your bowel movements. So just all of a sudden, your body just flips a switch and there's shit shooting out of your ass. So you definitely don't want to be wearing pants when that happens. So that's why they would have let their pants out and stuff. And I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if I hopped on a time machine and went back and watched the battle. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if I saw longbowmen, in between firing arrows. They would just have to go walk a couple of feet away from everybody and squat and just have shit shoot out of their ass. I mean, it just had to be absolutely brutal fighting a battle with dysentery. So, another reason why these British soldiers were fucking tough. Now, the size of the British army is hotly debated, and so is the size of the French army. I mean, it kind of seems like the French army could have been anywhere from 20,000 to 25,000 to 30,000 to 50,000 to even 100,000. So, yeah. And the same with the British army. Some people say 5,000, some people say 7,000, some people say 9,000. It's pretty annoying when we have no idea, but, I mean, it's just the nature of history, I guess. I mean, if you think these sources are annoying to deal with, you should have seen what I had to deal with the Trojan War. I mean, my God. Talk about having to shift through the bullshit. But I guess I'll just say the British had about 9,000 men, I guess. So that would have been like 7,000 longbowmen and about 2,000 dismounted men-at-arms. And I guess for the French, let's say they had 30,000 men. Now, it looks like about 10,000 of the Frenchmen would have been knights and men-at-arms, so these guys would have been heavily armored and would have been the best of the best. Now, considering the British only had 2,000 knights and men-at-arms, that's a pretty big disadvantage for the British. These guys would have had heavy plate armor, they would have had swords, they would have had axes. They probably mostly would have carried a shield with them, unless they preferred to carry a two-handed weapon like some kind of pole arm or maybe a two-handed sword or a really big battle axe, but mostly it probably just would have been swords and shields. And the men-at-arms for both sides were definitely tough. I mean, probably some of them knew each other. I mean, these guys had gone to tournaments against each other and stuff. I mean, these guys definitely would have been very well versed in the art of war. And another aspect of the battle, and for really the time period too, was that your main objective as a knight was to basically defeat the enemy, but to also capture another knight. because if you capture him, then you can hold him for ransom, and that's a very good way to make a shitload of money. So it definitely paid to pay attention to the different heraldry symbols on the shields and armor and the banners and stuff, because that way you can tell who was who. Like, you can tell, okay, that's that guy. Okay, that guy doesn't have any money, so screw him. But if I capture that guy now, we're talking. And of course, you can tell, okay, that's King Henry V's banner over there, so that's where he's going to be. And, it's very important stuff. And this whole, capture and hold for ransom was definitely a big aspect of the warfare of the time, especially between knights. Definitely, this was a big aspect of the whole chivalric code thing. But, it definitely worked. Like after the battle, French commander Charles d'Orléans was held in the Tower of London for 25 years while his family tried to pay his ransom for him to come home. So this was definitely a big part of the warfare and a very good way to get rich. But you have to remember too, if you are a knight, that means those guys over there are going to try and capture you and ransom you for your money basically. So definitely something to think about. But as for like common longbowmen and crossbowmen and stuff, nobody cared about those guys. Those guys would just be put to death mostly. So that's probably one of the reasons why the French, when they do attack, they just they don't give a shit about the English longbowmen, which will definitely bite them in the ass. So before the battle started, the British army was actually situated in a different place than it would be when the fighting actually occurred. That's mainly because the British were far enough away from the French to be pretty comfortable, and they thought it was a pretty good position. So this is probably where they would have been given their last rites. The Catholic priest would have come forward, and everybody would have been praying and all that kind of stuff. And it was probably around this time that Henry V would have given his speech. Now, nobody knows what King Henry V actually said in his speech, but it was probably, this is why we're here, this is why we're doing this. Remember what our grandfathers did against the frogs back at the Battle of Crécy and Poitiers? We can beat these bastards anywhere, anytime, any place. So they definitely would have been good to go after that, I'm sure. Now, of course, this is the moment that is immortalized in William Shakespeare's play, Henry V, where Henry V gives his St. Crispin's Day speech. Now, the reason why it's called the St. Crispin's Day speech is because October 25th is the Catholic feast of St. Crispin and Crispian, who were supposedly brothers that were martyred in the year 286. They were the patron saints of cobblers, curriers, tanners, and leather workers, who were executed by the Emperor Diocletian for preaching Christianity to the Gauls in 286 AD. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. So, yeah, the St. Crispin's Day speech is definitely one of William Shakespeare's best pieces of work. I guess I'll read it right now. So it starts off with the Earl of Westmoreland, who was one of Henry's commanders. He starts off by saying, "Oh, that we now had here but 1/10,000 of those men in England that do no work today." And then King Henry replies, "What's he that wishes so? My cousin Westmoreland? No, my fair cousin. If we are marked to die, we are now to do our country loss. And if to live, the fewer men, the greater share of honour. God's will, I pray thee, wish not one man more, by Jove. I am not covetous for gold, nor care I who doth feed upon my cost. It yearns me not if men my garments wear. Such outward things dwell not in my desires. But if it be a sin to covet honour, I am the most offending soul alive. No, faith, my cuz, wish not a man from England. God's peace, I would not lose so great an honour, as one man more methinks would share from me. For the best hope I have, oh, do not wish one more. Rather proclaim it, Westmoreland, through my host, that he which hath no stomach to this fight, let him depart. His passport shall be made, and crowns for convoy put into his purse. We would not die in that man's company, that fears his fellowship to die with us. This day is called the Feast of Crispian. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand a tiptoe when this day is named, and rouse him at the name of Crispian. He that shall live this day and see old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbors, and say, Tomorrow is St. Crispian. Then he will strip his sleeve and show his scars, and say, These wounds I had on Crispian's day. Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day. Then shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford, Exeter, Warwick, and Talbot, Salisbury, and Gloucestershire, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispian shall ne'er go by, from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother, be he ne'er so vile. This day shall gentle his condition, and gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they will not hear, and hold their manhoods cheap, whiles any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's day. So that's definitely an awesome speech. Kind of makes me wish I was in France today, but I'm broke, so I wasn't able to go for the 600th anniversary of the battle. But I'm sure it's going to be a pretty fun day for people who are there. I hear tell the battlefield has been well maintained, and it basically looks exactly the way it did 600 years ago. So I'd like to see that battlefield one of these years. And considering how many wars and battles have been fought in this area of France, I mean, it's pretty impressive that it's still in good condition. So after all that was done, it was probably this time when Henry V ordered that each and every one of his longbowmen go and cut a log and basically drive it into the earth and cut it into a spike. This way that would help defend against the French cavalry. Now, one of the interesting things about the British Army is that it is made up of mostly longbowmen. Now, there are a couple of theories as to why this is. Probably one of my favorite reasons is that longbowmen are a hell of a lot cheaper than men-at-arms. But I kind of think that longbowmen are a lot more versatile, too. They're able to act as light infantrymen in combat, and they're just able to get around easier than men-at-arms and knights, and they're kind of the backbone of the British Army, so they're definitely tough, and their long bows, I mean, those are very valuable. Now, the longbow has a range of about 300 yards, give or take. Kind of depends on the projectile they're using and the drawback weight. Now, these were war bows, so the drawback weight on these bows would have been pretty crazy. Basically anywhere from 100 pounds to 150 pounds. So, anyone thinking that archers would have been these kind of thin, light-looking guys is gravely mistaken. These guys would have been pretty big, pretty muscular, very barrel-chested because it took so much strength to draw the bow. And it took a lot of training with the bow, too. That's kind of why once the gunpowder age kind of got going, that's why archers slowly but inevitably fell out of use, because it took so much longer to become a good archer than it does to become a skilled shooter. So, and in fact, they are usually able to tell if a skeleton was an archer or not, because most archers were right-handed, so the left hand grasping the bow would have actually dealt with most of the weight from the pullback. So if you look at a skeleton and look at his bones in his left forearm, if the bones there are bigger than the bones on his right forearm, then he was most likely an archer. So that's how much weight we're talking about here. So yeah, these guys definitely would have been burly cutthroats. So they would have been very versatile and very useful. So they would have driven their stakes in the ground, and the whole army would have held the position for a while, but the French were not in a hurry to bring on battle. They knew they had the advantage in numbers, and they thought they definitely had the better men on the field. And they also had more reinforcements coming up too, because the French while Henry V was busy attacking Harfleur or gathering an army all over France. So, yeah, they were definitely waiting on reinforcements, and they could afford to wait, too. I mean, they had meals, they had clean water. The British had neither, so while the French army was just standing there refusing to give battle, the British army was just getting weaker and weaker and weaker, so something had to be done and fast. Now, the French army was deployed into 3 lines. First line would have been made up of mostly men-at-arms and knights on horseback, so this would have been designed to be one hell of a first blow. So it was also personally led by the overall commander of the French army, the Constable of France, Charles d'Albert. Seeing how the French king Charles VI was a nut job and definitely was not capable of commanding a French army in the field. So the Constable of France, Charles d'Albert, was in command. And like I said, he's leading the first line. Second line would have been made up of mostly men-at-arms. And the third line would have been made up of mostly, again, men-at-arms, a couple of thousand archers and a couple of thousand crossbowmen, and probably a couple of thousand cavalry too. So it's a pretty imposing army, pretty imposing. The British are certainly going to have their work cut out for them, but they've been here before. Maybe not in such rough shape, but their grandfathers defeated the French many times, so now it's their turn. So as the day wore on, it was becoming apparent to Henry V that the French weren't going to kick things off, so he was starting to get a little worried about his army. Basically just standing there, wasting away from lack of food, sleep, and just, sickness. I mean, I'm sure there were hundreds, if not thousands, of guys just shitting everywhere, so he basically came to the conclusion that we need to get this thing going now. So what Henry did next was very bold and very dangerous. He ordered his entire army to move forward a couple of 100 yards. So all the longbowmen had to grab their stakes and carry them with them. And they had to haul ass towards the French army. Now, I have no idea why the French did not attack the British when this was happening. I mean, hello. This would have been a perfect opportunity. I mean, not only are they leaving their chosen position, but the archers just took their freaking stakes out of the ground and are running along the ground with them. I mean, what the hell are you doing just sitting there? But for whatever reason, the constable did not order the French to attack. I don't know what the fuck. Maybe they were still confident or whatever. So the British moved forward. Basically, I think Henry wanted to get his longbowmen within basically maximum range of his longbows. So they were probably about 300 yards, give or take, from the French. So they stopped and got the stakes back in the ground. It kind of looks like, from everything I've seen, that the 2,000 or so men-at-arms would have been in the center, with the longbowmen on the flanks. Well, one very interesting thing about this movement forward, it actually maybe gave the British a better defensive position. Now, whether that was intentional or not, we will never know, but basically the battlefield at Agincourt kind of acts like a funnel. Basically where the French are is the widest part, and then as they would come towards the British, it's going to get more narrower and narrower and narrower. Because on the flanks, you got the villages of Agincourt and Tramcourt, and a lot of woods on the both sides too. So basically, you got 2 villages, one on each side of the British, and woods on both flanks. So basically, the British are now anchoring their flanks on the woods, so that will definitely help protect them from any flanking maneuvers from the French. And some sources say the British even put some of their longbowmen in the woods. So that was definitely a pretty damn good defensive position. Now, if I was the French, I would have either attacked when they were coming towards me, or I would have sent my cavalry arm, which would have been several thousand cavalrymen, including my creme de la creme knights. So I would have sent them probably through the villages of Agincourt or Tramcourt or whatever, and sent them behind the British. And then I would have used I think the French had like 4,000 archers and crossbowmen or whatever. I would have sent those guys forward to light up the British. Then I would have sent my men-at-arms in to fight the British men-at-arms, and then I would have sent some sort of signal to the French cavalry to attack the British archers from behind. Would have been kind of like the Battle of Stirling in the movie Braveheart, where William Wallace is telling the nobles to attack the English from behind. Would have been basically like, take out the archers, I'll meet you in the middle. Basically like that. So that would have been my strategy, but this is with 600 years worth of hindsight. So yeah, gotta cut the French a little slack here, being maybe a little timid, but I don't know what the hell. I don't know why they didn't do that, and I don't know why they didn't attack the British when they were on the move. Well, they're going to pay for those two mistakes. So basically, now that the British were in range, they started unleashing volleys of arrows at the French, basically trying to start a fight. So after a little while, I don't think the arrows would have really done any damage at that range. That would have been basically maximum range for longbowmen. And most of the French men-at-arms and knights would have been heavily armored in plate and mail and stuff, so yeah, arrows would have just dinged harmlessly off of them. But if some dumb bastard had left his visor down, maybe he could have taken an arrow to the eye or whatever. But I guess the French had had enough sitting around and waiting, so they basically, the entire first line just started to charge. And seeing how it had been raining for a while, the ground was very soft and muddy. But it wasn't too bad at the start. It would naturally get worse and worse as more men and horses trampled in the mud and stuff. It would get a lot worse. But for the first charge, it probably wasn't too bad. So it looked like the French men-at-arms were going to charge right up the middle for the British men-at-arms. I guess because that's where, the ransom money is. You want to go for that. And that's also where they would have seen King Henry V's banner, so they would have been, all right, let's take the commander, and we win. So it would have made sense for them to charge the British center, but they would have been relying on their mounted knights and other cavalry to take out the archers. So that seems like what the French cavalry tried to do. They charged the British longbowmen. Now, the entire way, they would have been just eating arrows. Now, the French knights on horseback would have been pretty well protected with their heavy plate armor, but their horses, on the other hand, their horses would have been taking arrows to the face, to the chest. They would have been just shot to hell the entire way. And, of course, the mud would have been a problem, and if a horse goes down, maybe all the horses behind that horse are going to trip over. It's just going to be a fucking mess. And you do not want to be a heavily armored knight taking a 6-foot fall right into mud, because you are not getting out of that mud. This isn't going to happen. It'd be probably messy enough and tough enough being in regular clothes, but wearing, 50, 60 pounds of steel, yeah, you're going to be sitting the rest of the battle out there, just lying on your back or your face, so pretty brutal, but, yeah, so in the cavalry, I guess they would have been the first to reach the British lines. They would have just been shot to hell. And as soon as they got to the spikes, horses aren't stupid. They're not going to charge right into it. That is, if they see it. Now, if they didn't see the spikes, they're going to, unfortunately, run right into them. So that would have been pretty brutal. And if they aren't going to charge the spikes, and they're just going to ride around, getting shot at. So it would have been pretty rough. Now, I'm not sure what kind of arrowheads the British would have been using. Probably the bodkin points, which are armor-piercing arrowheads, but they tended to be made out of iron, so they're not going to pierce steel. Now, looking into it, it seems like the average thickness of armor kind of depended on what piece of armor. Like, the helmet and the breastplate tended to be the thickest, probably about 2 millimeters, but the arms and the legs would have probably just been 1 millimeter, or maybe 1.5 millimeters. But that probably would have been sufficient overall to protect them from arrows. But, like I said, the horses are going to have a tough time. And it's not like getting shot by a freaking 150-pound drawback arrow is going to be nice. I mean, it's going to be like getting smacked by a baseball bat. So, if you fall over, you're going to have a tough time getting up, especially falling from a horse. So, the French cavalry didn't really accomplish anything other than getting shot to hell. So by the time the men-at-arms, who had been probably hauling ass trying to get to the British men-at-arms as fast as they could, probably by the time they reached the British men-at-arms, they're going to be exhausted. They're just going to be like, "Faut merde, faut merde." They would have just been probably really fucking exhausted. Because you got to remember, too, the further you run in mud, the more it's going to stick to your legs, and it's just going to be just going to get harder and harder to move. And now you got to go up against world-class, swordsmen and stuff. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So when the two armies of men-at-arms clashed, that had to be a pretty crazy thing. Would have been very loud, very brutal. Swords, for the most part, wouldn't have been too effective at this time. I mean, you're not going to, cut through solid plate armor. But I guess you could use it to stab through the weak points, like around the neck and maybe the visors and stuff. But swords are slowly being phased out for more crushing weapons like warhammers and halberds and stuff like that. But would have been some pretty crazy fighting going on. Yeah, and you gotta remember too, the British longbowmen would have been shooting up that second wave the whole time too. Because I guess men-at-arms were considered the second wave of the attack, so I don't know, but yeah. But I don't know, it might be kind of controversial of me to say, but I don't think the longbowmen would have been doing too much damage to the men-at-arms. Most of these guys would have had heavy plate armor. They would have been carrying shields, other than the guys who were carrying the two-handed weapons. But I don't think they would have been doing too much, and that's probably why, for the most part, the men-at-arms didn't really bother going after the longbowmen. They just wanted to get their hands on the British men-at-arms. But actually, this turned out to be a big mistake on their part. Because if you are attacking a line of enemy soldiers and you just form up and go straight for the middle, well, eventually, when you push that middle back, the enemy line is going to start to enclose upon you. So this is probably the point where the French men-at-arms started to get a little surrounded, because they were pushing the British men-at-arms back just by sheer numbers and weight, but they weren't really causing damage to the British men-at-arms, because the French men-at-arms were getting so packed into each other that they weren't even supposedly able to really use their weapons. They were just getting crushed into each other. So the British men-at-arms were kind of able to fight them at a safe distance, kind of just trying to jab them here and there. And if you had like a halberd or something, you could just whack that on the heads of the French men-at-arms, and there's not a whole lot they could do. Just like the Romans at the Battle of Cannae. And probably around this time is when the French constable Charles d'Albert, he was probably killed around this time. So they just lost their commander. And now the British longbowmen are running out of arrows, so this is when they drop their bows and pick up their hatchets and swords and cudgels and whatever and just swarm onto the flanks of the French men-at-arms. They are able to move much more swiftly and loosely through the mud and stuff, so they're basically just stabbing through the weak points in the armor, killing French men-at-arms and knights who have been knocked down in the mud, finishing them off. They don't really care about ransom because, well, and another thing too is they know damn well that these men-at-arms would have slaughtered each and every one of them without mercy. So they're definitely fighting for their survival, they think. So this is getting pretty brutal now. I mean, imagine falling over in the mud as a French men-at-arm, and falling face first would just be a nightmare. You're hearing all the fighting going on and you can't get up, you can't see anything. There's mud and water seeping through your holes in your visor. Then all of a sudden a freaking British longbowman shows up and sticks a dagger through the back of your helmet into your skull. I mean, that's pretty scary. So it's pretty rough fighting going on. The British, though, are definitely winning. They're hacking away, slicing away. And after a little while of this is the French men-at-arms in the back start to kind of try and get the hell out of there. So they start to peel off and run back to the French lines as quickly as they can. But the guys who are up front fighting the British men-at-arms, now they're getting surrounded. So eventually those guys are taken prisoner. And it's a pretty good haul. Supposedly the British got a couple of thousand knights and men-at-arms to surrender, so it's pretty good. But while the British longbowmen are finishing off, wounded and downed French men-at-arms, it's basically around this time that the British look towards the French lines and they notice, oh yeah, we kind of forgot about that third wave there. So the French third wave is starting to move forward now, and it basically by itself outnumbers the British, supposedly, so they're kind of worried. Now that the longbowmen are out of arrows, this is pretty serious. So in the most controversial moment of the battle, King Henry V orders that all the French prisoners be put to death, mainly because it's too big of a threat having these guys, behind us while we're trying to hold off all those guys over there coming. And I've done this before many times. I know it's rough and brutal and cruel. It's murder, basically. But, in medieval Total War, I know it's a video game, but still, I've done that several times. If I'm losing a fight, I'm definitely going to kill all the guys I've captured, just put a dent in the enemy. So, it's pretty rough, but hey, I'm not going to give Henry V under the circumstances too much shit. Most of the British knights and men-at-arms refuse to do it because it's like, well, this is against the code of chivalry, and we are quite literally killing our fortune, so it'd be kind of hard to get guys to do that. So basically they got the longbowmen to come over and start dispatching these guys. And so it was getting pretty brutal, and so supposedly the third French wave saw this happening and was like, whoa, okay. So they started to back off, and that's when the slaughter was put to an end. Supposedly not too many of the French prisoners were killed, but who knows? Could have been a couple of thousand of them, or it could just been a couple of hundred. Hopefully, for honor's sake, it was just a couple of hundred. And this was a very desperate move in a very desperate situation, so you gotta understand that. And probably another contributing factor to this was that at some point during the fighting, a French knight, Battle of Agincourt, led a small army of about 1,000 men or so and attacked the British baggage train, which would have been at the rear of the army, and made off with a lot of treasure. In fact, I think they got one of Henry's crowns or whatever, so that would have been pretty bad. I guess Agincourt was maybe a knight of the village Agincourt. Maybe that's where he got his name, I guess. So I don't know if the French commanders ordered the attack or what, or maybe the guy just wanted to, get his hands on some loot. But would have been pretty silly for the French not to exploit that if they had ordered that attack. So maybe it was just spontaneously that guy just wanted some loot. So kind of crazy, but yeah, the battle is basically officially over, though. After just a couple of hours, the battle was maybe just 2 or 3 hours long. So in that time period, somewhere around 10,000 Frenchmen were killed or wounded, and about 1,500 knights and nobles were captured by the British. Supposedly, the British only lost about 100 men. So yeah, this was a fucking very, very good victory for Henry. And a very, very bad defeat for the French. The French lost their constable, they lost 3 dukes, 8 counts, a viscount, even an archbishop died. So this was a very bad defeat for the French. But this was awesome for Henry V. It was a great victory for him. And it's not like he was a puss. He was in the fighting. He even saved his brother's life during the fighting, so he was definitely getting in there. In fact, I think he took an axe blow to his helmet, which, on his helmet he had the crown, and just to, kind of signal, hey, I'm the king. and he took an axe to the helmet, which kind of split his crown, but other than that, he was unscathed. So yeah, this was definitely a great day for him. And in fact, he was only 28 years old. In fact, he was born in 1387, and I'm 28 years old right now, and I was born in 1987, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, after the battle, he and his army continued their march for Calais, and once they got there, they boarded ships for England. And he and his army arrived in London on November 23rd to a hero's welcome. Now, sometime after the battle, there was a peace treaty, and Henry V married the daughter of Charles VI. His daughter was Catherine of Valois, and together they had a son who would go on to be Henry VI of England and Henry II of France. That was probably the closest Britain ever came to conquering France, but unfortunately for the British, they weren't able to consolidate their holds on France and ended up losing the whole damn thing eventually. But as far as October 25th, 1415 goes, it's still a pretty good day for Britain.